Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of MCAT Channel. My name is John Lennick. I'll be your tour guide through this next session. How are we all doing today, though? Let's do a little check-in before we jump in. I know we got a couple folks that are a little new to the channel tonight, so if you guys are new, just a little reminder, we've got the chat here, we've got the Q&A in the bottom, and we've got quite a few teachers in the room. Chuck D and Captain Kristen are all here, so let us know if you have any questions at all, and we can definitely help you guys out. Perfect. Yeah, welcome to your first session. We really love the way this is running these days, and so it's pretty fun. The nice thing is any questions you have, you can ask them in the middle of the class. We do, of course, want to talk about cars, but if you do have carryover questions from the last session, feel free. We still have all the same teachers in the room, so you can throw them in the Q&A still. All right, so let's get this party started. We're going to, understandable, Jennifer. So what we're going to do, and that's not to jump into cars too quickly or anything, but remember, we go through some of the most intense topics in these classes, and so a lot of these classes are intended to be taken after you've already been introduced to them in your standard course. And so if you haven't covered any of your biochem classes yet, and you just sat through, well, I guess it'd be biochem, so the molecular genetic stuff, that might have been all over your head, which is totally fine. But don't worry if it does feel over your head. We make a point to go through some of the more complex material in this class. And so it really does exist that way for a specific reason. So after you cover a lot of that stuff in your general class, you can come back, take this again, maybe feel like you've got a little bit more control of the material, I guess you could say. So remember, in the general format, we talk material and content in the classes, but we're primarily talking strategy. The reason that we know you'll be more comfortable with the content after a class is that all the preview work before that class, you'll be watching all the preview videos, you'll be doing all the readings, all that kind of stuff. Okay, but yeah, so do not stress out if you jump in, you're feeling a little over the top, because these are pretty advanced classes. But the nice thing is you can really come to these as many times as you want. As you know, we run 6 nights a week, I believe. Yeah, I think it's 6 days a week. And so we offer these a whole bunch, so feel free to come back as many times as you want. All right, with that little intro stated, let's start talking about cars. And so one thing that I do want to let you know about these cars classes is that we've started really breaking them down into their component parts. And so as you know, this one is called Question and Answer Strategy. And so we're really just going to focus on questions and answers. We're not going to go through the outlining strategy. We're going to go through a couple passages together, but we're not going to focus on it. So just as a heads up, some of the passages we do, we're not even going to give you the passage at all. We'll give you a sample map. We'll utilize the map to answer questions, but it really is, we're going to focus on the questions and the answers today. And so we do have other CARS classes that will exclusively focus on the outlining, going through the passages and all that, but I just want to let you guys kind of get the idea of what we're going to be doing today. It is very specialized on purpose. Cool. All right, so first thing we'll do, of course, is apply the Kaplan question strategy for cars. We'll go through that quite a bit. After that, we'll talk about some wrong answer pathologies. There's 4 classic ones that we'll talk about. We'll talk about how to identify them as quickly as possible to save yourself as much time as possible as well. Cool. After that, we'll talk about confirming correct answers as well as reviewing your correct and incorrect answers effectively. So at the very end, we'll talk about post-phrasing, a little bit about why I missed it sheets, and some general CARS practice you can do from this point on. All right. So with that stated, let's jump into the very first learning goal, and we'll talk about the general question strategy. So it runs. Number 1, we assess. After that, of course, there we go, we plan. After that, we execute, and finally answer the question. So we'll break each one of these down piece by piece and talk about why they exist, what they do, and why we do them. All right, so first step is assess. So when you look at any CARS question, it's really important to read the question and not the answers. Why do you think it's so important to not read the answer choices when you're jumping into any CARS, especially CARS questions, even more so than lots of other parts of the test? Please, exceptionally more so than the rest of the test. Yeah, Kelsey, good point. Everything sounds pretty good. There's a couple ways we could say this. Yeah, Bellany, and let me know if that's the correct way to say it as well, but you got it. Distractors are the number 1. They write answer choices because they know they look good. Don't let yourself get sucked into the answers until you already have a pretty solid plan. Exactly. There you go. Is it Bishek? Let me know if that's the correct way to say it as well. But you got it. You got to make a plan first. I'm not sure if it's a silent K or not. Let me know if it is or not. Cool. You got it. Don't look at the answers. Oh, it is Shake. Okay, gotcha. Happy Shake. For some reason, I thought it was a silent K. Not sure why I thought it was a silent K, but you got it. All right, so that's the first one. So read the question, not the answers. The couple other reasons that you want to go through this is because you want to find out if it's an especially difficult question. If it's crazy complicated, if it's super long, if it's going to take too long to go through, remember every single time that you put, let's take a step back. Every single question on the MCAT is worth 1 point and only 1 point. And so if you can get a point out of a question going, spending only 10 seconds, you might as well get that one and then write off the one that's going to take you 2, 3, maybe even 4 minutes to solve. Especially in cars, and I'm going to put this out there. Does anyone struggle with the timing in cars more than the other sections pretty exclusively? Yeah, I totally agree. For the vast majority of us, cars is the most difficult when it comes to timing. It's just that you have to spend a whole lot more time in the passage in cars than you do in the rest of the science sections. So because of that, this is why assessing is going to be exceptionally important, is because you need to triage. We talk about triaging a lot in your class. We'll go more into it in future classes as well. But man, so Edmund's got a really good point there too. You want to make sure that you're using the time strategically, because you want to be careful. If you go too fast, you're going to make mistakes. Whereas the questions that are going to take too long, yeah, you could speed through them, maybe miss 1 point, but if you find yourself rushing through a bunch of questions and you miss several points, that's where the real problem is. And Chuck's got the point there. It's all about triaging. We talk about it quite a lot in a bunch of different classes, but we'll kind of get a bit into it today as well and talk about what kind of questions you should triage and not deal with due to things such as this. If it's a difficult concept, long question stem, especially complicated, something that's just going to take too much time. All right, so now, of course, then you'll decide, do you want to do the question now or do you want to do the question later? Now, one thing that I do want you to be careful with, if you decide to do a question later in cars, let's say that you do the first 2 questions, see the third, decide that you don't want to do it, when do you want to do it? Like, when should you come back and do that question if you're skipping the third one in a set? Yeah, bingo, Ariel. You want to do it before you move on to the next passage. This is very specific to cars and not to the other parts of the test, because in cars, all the questions are based on the passage themselves. Sometimes in the science sections, you'll get a question that's in the middle of a passage, where in reality it's a pseudo-discrete and you could probably solve it whether you read the passage or not. Those are good ones to triage until the very end of the section. So the cool thing about the MCAT is they have a mark functionality. Have you guys messed with that before? Do you know how the mark works? It's a super cool thing. Perfect. Most of us have. All right, good. Really, really, really useful, because at the very end, you can just go right back to all those questions that you marked and just go directly to those. And so that'll be really important in the sciences. In cars, though, generally, if you're going to triage, you triage the entire passage. And since we're just talking about questions individually today, I mostly want to say if we're triaging individual questions, solve it before you come back to the end, before you move on to the next passage. Excuse me. There you go. So of course, as we said on test day, you can triage a couple, but remember, everything's worth the exact same. And so the general idea is if you triage it, answer the other ones, check your timing, and realize that you're already way behind, your best option is to take a real quick strategic guess. The thing is, don't leave it blank. That's your number one. Don't ever leave anything blank, because even just a random guess between A, B, C, or D gives you a 25% chance of getting it right. And then, of course, at the very end, if you do somehow have time, you can kind of come back, reread the passage effectively, or reread the whole passage and do all the questions again if you skip the whole thing. But you just don't want to leave things blank unless you're skipping an entire passage. So if you do decide to triage an entire passage itself, don't feel like you have to click in a random answer for every single question. That's just if you're skipping an individual question. Chances are, if you're going to skip a whole passage, a little less than Kelsey, but closer to it now since the test changed. Yeah, we can kind of do all the math and all that stuff as we go through the full section strategy. But we do also, as a heads up, you have a little bit more time than you used to have on the old MCAT. The old MCAT gave you about 8.5, so you're getting closer to 10 now. I'm not sure if it's exactly 10, but it's pretty darn close to it. We could actually calculate it out, though. But that is a good sign. We do have, of course, a little bit more time per question nowadays than we used to have in the old MCAT. So I think that's totally worth the change. But yeah, now we got to learn biochem and psych social and all that stuff, too. Cool. Perfect. Abhishek, there's a couple things we could say about that. I would throw it into the Q&A, but generally speaking, all of the tests that we've made were modeled off of exactly what the AAMC has, of course, released. The problem is right now the AAMC only has a single practice test out there, and so as they start to release more, we're going to get more representative data and figure out more what it's like. But as for now, it very much is representative of what they've released so far and all of the data they've set up that they want to focus on and the different learning goals that they really have themselves in the car section. So, but if you want more details, throw in the Q&A. We can get really into that stuff. Cool. Yeah, it's fun. If you guys actually haven't been to the AMC's website before to look at their actual, like the scientific concepts and reasoning skills that they're specifically testing, they do have it very straightforward listed on their website, and you'll notice that our class itself is actually specifically designed around the way that they are testing the material according to the AMC themselves. And so if you haven't checked out the AMC site, give it a shot. It'll kind of like make a lot more sense, like why we're jumping back and forth in your lesson book and all those other things. There is specific reasons why, and it's all based on the AMC. So, all right. So with that aside, let's move on to the second step. The second step, of course, is to plan. So the plan is basically just figuring out what it is you have to do. So what's the task it's asking you to do? That's what we said right there. Do you need to find details? Do you have to think about the author's opinion? Do you have to bring in something from an outside context to see if it'll weaken or strengthen? Are you looking for a relationship between the question stem and a new idea, or the question stem and the text itself? And of course, as very commonly we see, the author's main idea as well. So then you got to figure out where you need the information from. And sometimes you're going to have to go back to the passage. Sometimes you'll just remember it. Sometimes you can use your outline to find it. And sometimes you don't even need to find the right answer at all, because you can just use wrong answers to eliminate 3 of them and then be left with 1 that's correct. And we'll go through that quite a bit today. I'm going to talk about how you can actually solve a good chunk of questions without even really knowing the answer, just through being very strategic and doing a lot of elimination. It's pretty fun. And of course, we'll talk about highlighted phrases in the passage as well. And we'll go through a little bit of passages together, but we really will focus on the questions today, as we mentioned before. All right, after we've got our plan, know what we're doing, we're going to execute it, follow through with what our plan was, so try to predict what it is. Sometimes when we try to execute and really predict, it's not a full answer. In fact, in CARS, rarely will you try to predict exactly word for word what the answer is going to be, because we're never going to get an exact match. Instead, we're looking for general themes. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it neutral? Is it strong? Is it, find just the themes of the answer choices, which sometimes means you're looking for a specific word. And so I'll show you a couple examples of that today, where sometimes you're literally just looking for a single word. If the answer choice has the word, it's the right answer. If it doesn't, it's going to be wrong. We'll show you how that actually does work out more frequently than you would expect it to. All right, and the last one, as we said, of course, is answer. Sometimes it's matching perfectly. Sometimes it's eliminating. Sometimes it's guessing. But even if you do have to guess, try to take some strategic guessing. So at least look through and find something that's either not overly strong, something that has the right theme, the right tone. And we'll look for some kind of quality that will make us want that answer choice over others. And we'll go through that today as well. All right, so as you know, that'll be the main focus as we go through. So we'll start off with a pretty fun question here about Alex. So it says, Alex is going to the store to buy some food for dinner. He's trying to eat more healthy, and so we're looking for something that Alex will most likely purchase. All right, so let's go through all the steps. So, of course, assess, first and foremost. Notice we're not looking at the answer choices. We got to decide, do we want to do this now or later? Easy, not easy. And then saying, nah, yes. It looks like, yeah, I agree. Let's do it right now. It looks pretty easy. We're talking about someone going to get dinner. Not too bad. So now the plan is, what are we going to be looking for in the answer choices? So what are the general themes that we try to identify here? Yeah, healthy food, Jennifer, right? Something that's not too unhealthy. Something that would be, I don't know, there's a lot of things you could say that would be healthy. Any predictions? Things that you might avoid or things that you would go for? You can go either way. You can look for things you're not looking for. Looking for veggies, Ariel, exactly true. Some fruit, perfect. We got some idea. Yeah, just some green stuff, right? Veggies, fruit, things like that. Whole grains, perfect. You guys are all about this. And so, of course, it's looking for something that's healthy. Also, some healthy food for dinner. Specifically, it must be food if we're planning on eating it as well. All right, so then execute a course. Let's look at the question stems. That's what our prediction was. We could say low in fat, low in sugar, high in fruits, high in veggies, something like that. And then we'll try to match it. So here's a fun thing we can do. I'm actually going to minimize this poll. We can bring it back later on, but for now, and move it to the side. Throw your answers in. I know this might be a little silly sounding, but we're starting off in a fun way. What's Alex going to buy? And we'll talk about the wrong answers more specifically here for a second, but not too hard of a question. We do, of course, have 100% going for the right answer. We've got everybody saying C. I agree. Kale and salmon. We've got the veggies that we predicted. The green stuff, salmon, also not necessarily a whole grain, but also something that's fairly healthy. So let's talk about the wrong ones. A, of course, is wrong because it's donuts. Donuts isn't healthy. B is wrong because it's not food, right? So not only are we looking for something that's healthy, we're also looking for something that's food. And D has, of course, the keyword for fried chicken breasts, we generally assume fried foods as being unhealthy foods, using, of course, our background knowledge. But as Chuck says, donuts are still pretty awesome. I hear the thing, though, is not donuts, but cronuts. Apparently, it's a new thing in New York where they make croissants into donuts. I've yet to have them, but apparently they're all the rage. Yeah, so, all right. Perfect. Must have. I will give them a shot next time that I have the opportunity to do so. Yeah, I haven't either, Kelsey. I've just heard, yeah, as Chuck says, I learned of this on the internet as well. All right, so that's our silly example. Let's kind of get into the real stuff now. So let's jump into this passage. We're going to go through this fairly quickly. So as we said, we're not overly focusing on outlining, so we're going to almost go through this as it's kind of a real quick, hyper-speed, looking for main points passage. So first paragraph, what do you guys think we're going to be discussing? We are discussing these things called expert systems. You gotta be Shik. So it's, or be Shik, there you go. But exactly, yeah, expert systems. So now it says that we use these to help find petroleum, teach children stuff, advise advisors. They also, now one thing I do want to talk about when we're going through quickly and reading, notice that generally speaking, the very last sentence in the first paragraph really often gives you the main point. So generally the last sentence in the first paragraph is called the thesis statement. It's usually a big takeaway. But notice in this one they happen to say they also. And so if the last sentence in the first paragraph and starts with they also, do we really care about that sentence? What do you think? And if not, why not? Yeah, why not though? Not as much, because if it says they also, it means it's just a certain type of keyword. Yeah, additional information, Kelsey. More examples, extra information. We already got the main idea. So everything before that, of course, was going to be the main point, and it's really all in that first sentence. Everything after the first sentence just gives you examples of how it's used. So expert systems, they basically do expert problems that humans used to do. All right, now the next paragraph, generally speaking, once again, first sentences have the main theme, and especially this first sentence. What about this first sentence really lets us know that we pay very close attention to it? Must, Kelsey, exactly true. These things must have an interface. So that's probably going to be our entire outline for the very second paragraph. It includes an interface. So it says it's a way of communicating with those. Most ES guides users about their goals, resources. Main thing is interface. It's got that must there. That's where it's at. Good work. All right, how about the third paragraph? Notice we're doing this pretty quick. We're just looking for the themes, general structure. Cool. Huge, once again, strong language. And Melanie, what's huge directing you towards? We have a huge database, exactly. So database is our keyword for this third paragraph. And so now if you're not sure what it means, it tells you that it consists of facts. They can be updated as frequently as necessary. And then we get an example. All right, so no big deal. Once again, we're talking about databases, and facts are in the database. Notice we're getting all the key information in the first sentence alone, and every time that we get multiple sentences after that, they're just giving us more examples. So we can breeze through those examples, look at them later on if we need to. Once again, remember, we're kind of going quickly through the passage here, which is because today's focus is mostly on questions. All right, so it moves on to paragraph number 4. If you're going to choose a word to outline paragraph 4, what would it be? You got a knowledge base. Perfect. So now it looks like we're talking about the third part is this knowledge base. Once again, though, it says that it does have facts. So now, one thing I would say, generally speaking, in terms of reading in cars, is our previous paragraph talked about a database, which was also facts. So what are we going to really look for in this paragraph if we already have something that's a type of base full of facts? So knowledge, totally, Jennifer, but what are you going to scan for at least? You'll just read till you get the gist of it. Yeah, Kelsey, let's just find the main difference. So try to just scan through this quickly just to get the general difference between the two. And let me know if you identify any keywords that would kind of show us how this is different than our previous database. So database was facts. What's a knowledge base? There's a couple words you could use here. I'll let you guys scan. Don't read carefully, just scan. Nice, Kelsey and Jennifer saying the same thing. I agree, frames. So the first one is we have these things called frames. Now, when you see frames, does that make sense? If not, You might want to see what Livingston just put into the chat because it's getting at rules. That's because when we see frames, like we're like, oh, frames, it's probably not referring to like a picture frame, right? So you want to figure out what it means. And if you read down, you'll notice that later on, it actually gives you lots of different times. It says rules that they relate to another. Notice right again, it says rules once again. It actually says rules quite a few times there, which means we do care about rules. And I like that you guys pulled that out fairly quickly. Good job, team. So we've got this knowledge base. It's got these things called frames, and we know frames are about rules. That's about it. That's all we actually need. Let's go on to the next paragraph. All right, how about paragraph 5? What's the theme here? This one does sound a bit different. Intelligent, yeah, so we have these intelligent in quotes, right? It's an inference engine, exactly, Kelsey, you got it. So the intelligent part of it is this inference engine. Notice once again, though, they're pointing to that same idea of rules. So this is the rules for searching the data and knowledge bases. So wait a second, what's this thing really doing then? If you want to think structurally about this part of your expert system, or even the passage as a whole, what's this inference engine do? Rules of thumb, totally true. Couple ways we could say this. Ariel, I like it. That's getting kind of the main idea here. It's basically connecting the dots together, right? And so we've already talked about this knowledge base. We've talked about this database. This is basically the intelligent part that's going to search specifically and connect the dots between the various systems. So it's the intelligent part of it. It's making inferences. And that, I mean, of course, if we're good with our question stem types, know our deductions and our inference questions, we can kind of infer that as well. It's basically Siri, as Ariel says. You got it. Well, Siri might be the interface, come to think of it. You know what I mean? Because that's like the voice would be the interface, right? But it's what Siri's doing, right? It's the intelligent part of Siri. It's the actual program of Siri. But yeah, you got it. You could read it both ways, Ariel. You know what I mean? It's which part of it you're talking about, you know? But you're totally right. All right. So of course, notice once again, it's linking the other things. Once again, we're focusing on rules. That's the general idea. So it's the inference engine, searches, rules, ties it all together. General idea, we've got 4 main parts so far. We've got, of course, the interface, we've got the database, we've got the knowledge base, we've got the, and of course, this combination of the things together, right, the inference engine. All right, now what's the, yeah, and as Bellany's saying, I do highly recommend reading the first and last sentence of every paragraph carefully. Notice how we saw in the previous ones that if you read the last paragraph, the last sentence of the paragraph, it actually just had examples, like this one was examples, if this happens, that happens. But in here, notice it says, by linking the other things, it would predict. Notice that in both of these, the last sentence is actually just going through examples. And so if the last sentence is just giving an example, don't really focus on it. But if the last sentence has a conclusion keyword in it, oh my gosh, like that's awesome, because what it's probably going to do is sum up the entire paragraph in that last sentence. But yeah, if it has a continuation or it's just kind of like reiterating an example, then don't worry about it too much. Oh, for sure, that's, oh man, that's, if you ever find a conclusion keyword for the last sentence, I promise you, it's probably going to be super essential for questions. Or at least save you a bunch of time, because then you don't have to read the whole paragraph carefully. It'll sum it up for you pretty quick. So I know we're not doing too much question stuff, but if we're going to do the passage, we got to get through this pretty quick. So I'm giving you guys some little other things to think about while we're doing it. All right, so as we said, inference engine, searches, links, rules, ties the dots together. What's the theme of this paragraph? I think this is our last one now. Perfect, Jennifer, skeptics, right? So now we're changing, we've talked about this expert system thing now. Now we're discussing skeptics. And so notice specifically it says that skeptics argue. So we're then going to get, of course, a bunch of arguments that are specifically against expert systems. Now, in terms of structure, what are the arguments that skeptics provide here? Or how many are they giving you? You'll notice the structure of the sentences kind of gives it to you. First sentence says skeptics argue, you guys got it, 3, that they're complex is the first one. Then it says skeptics also claim, giving you the second sentence, that it takes too much time to enter them in. And then finally, third sentence, skeptics maintain that they don't have this whole intuition thing. Now what happens after we kind of close off that skeptic argument? Bingo, Jennifer, refute. It says then ES, expert system designers, reply. So let's just think about this structurally. If the beginning of the paragraph starts with skeptics argue that, and then the last part of the paragraph talks about designers reply, which one do you think the author would be more in favor of? The skeptics or the designers that are refuting the skeptics? Jared says the reply, the designers, I agree. Refuting the skeptics, right? The entire thing was talking about expert systems. We get some skeptics. Now we're going to refute them. Chances are the author thinks these expert system things are pretty cool. So now here's the really fun thing. Notice that the skeptics gave 3 specific arguments. How many counter arguments do you predict that this designers are going to give? Probably also 3. They'll probably give a counter argument to each individual argument. So the first one was complex. The designers reply that they're friendly. We also said took too much time. These designers say, no, you can make it automatic. The third one was that they don't have intuition. And the skeptics reply that if intuition is real, they can build it into systems. So we do get 3 arguments, and then of course we get the 3 different ways that they refute those counter arguments. That's just really getting into the structure and how to read passages real structurally and critically. So, all right, so of course skeptics versus designers, we get the battle that we have between the 2 of them. All right, so if we want, we're not going to go through building the outline together. Well, I mean, we already did this together. So I'm just going to kind of open this all up. But so the one thing we didn't discuss is the goal, and it's how expert systems work. And of course, it presents arguments both for and against, but you could tell he's definitely more in favor of the for than the against, given that the whole thing is discussing expert systems. All right, so let's get to the questions, because this is where everything is at, as we mentioned before. So let's read this one. It says, suppose some clients preferred psychotherapy delivered by an expert system, and please throw your answers into the poll as soon as you are ready. So this finding would best support the claim that. So notice it says that clients prefer expert systems to real people. So if clients prefer expert systems to real people, what claim did this support? And I'm going to really focus on wrong answer types here throughout the whole class, because that's sometimes the easiest way to get through this stuff. You guys are looking great. We do have majority going for the correct answer already. All right, so the plan for here, we want to think about, of course, what are we being asked to find? And so some kind of a claim about the effectiveness of expert systems. It is a copper mug, it's true. Where did we talk about the effectiveness of expert systems? It's my new water glass. Enjoy it. Stays cold. Where do we really talk about the uses of expert systems even? Not just the structure. Yeah, B-Shake, you got it right in the beginning, right? So of course this was in the beginning of it. We said that they can actually do some things better than humans can right in the very beginning. Remember, we're using these things to replace humans, which of course is why if we look at the answer choices here, we do have vast majority of you all going for answer choice D. Nice work. Now, I want to also focus on some wrong answers here because there's some general themes here. We'll go through these throughout today's class, but we might as well do it throughout. Notice many psychologists are incompetent. Wait a second. Was that a claim in the passage? Psychologists are incompetent? Or that psychotherapy is simple? No, we didn't even talk about this stuff. We're talking about computers. We can't make any kind of claims about psychologists or psychotherapy in general. Now, you'll notice that we did have a couple people going for C, though. So now, what's wrong with C? Oops. What's wrong with C? Got it, Jared. Totally out of scope. There's one word in it that I don't like. Is it Moreniki? I don't know if that's the correct way to say it. Yeah, better. You got it. We did talk about them also having intuition. We never made the claim that they're more intuitive than humans are. That's going too far. It's going too extreme. So we never said they were better. It's just that they also do have intuition themselves. They said you could build it into the system in that final paragraph. Nice work. All right, let's do the same thing here. I'll clear it out. I'll let you guys throw your answers in. All right, so first things first, our plan is, what are we looking for? Where would we find this information? So we're looking for a claim that is offered to counter. You got it. Well, I think it was paragraph 5. But it was the last paragraph though, Jared, right? I forgot if it was 4 or 5, but the last one that we had right there, that's where we talked about claims basically countering anything or arguing for anything, right? Totally, exactly. So wait a second. We just look back to that paragraph, right? Notice, was this one of the critics? Did we talk about amount of time ever in the passage? We do definitely. We sure did, right? So they talked about the time being, of course, too much. So we got to look back to that paragraph and find what the counter argument was in order to make our prediction here. And it specifically said that once we got to the second half of that paragraph, that the designer said we can already automatically transfer information into them, which means we're really just looking for one keyword in the answer stem, and we really do have almost everybody, 100% of you going for answer choice C, which is exactly right. Automatic data transfer. This is one of those situations where it's very much just matching a word. And so as we said, we're going to look for what the counter was, and automatic transfer was it. So you look through the answer choices, only a single answer choice has automatic even in it. Cool. How about A? What's wrong with A? This is actually a really good classic wrong answer trap as well. Because that was in the passage. We even put that in the same paragraph. Exactly, Jennifer. That was the counter to a different counter argument, right? It wasn't relative to time. The only response we put to the time was the automatic transfer. The intuition was a completely different critic or whatever we had the critics had or problem they had with it. So it would be a faulty use of detail. Nice work, Jared. Exactly. It's a true statement, but just because it's true does not make it correct. It has to address the issue of time, and only C does that. Perfect. Good work. And that was actually the same thing with D. That was another one that was another faulty use of detail. It's good work, team. All right, I'll clear this out. Once again, I'll let you guys throw your answers into the poll. Whew. Gotcha. Oh, yeah, FUD. Gotcha. So we're looking for something that would not help for an expert system. Now, it might be kind of hard to just apply this real straightforward, but we could use examples from the passage to at least where we know that expert systems are helpful. Where would you find examples from the passage where at least we knew that these expert systems were useful? We just find something that sounds a lot different than that. And you guys all have the handout too, right? It's got the full passage on it. I know we don't have it on the screen right now. I'll bring it up again. Is it right? Put it right here for now. So just click on that and then click on the thing and then save to your computer. We'll minimize it once again. Yeah, so that's the one thing with all these channel classes. I recommend always grabbing the handout at the very beginning, especially the CARS ones, because we'll often go through a passage and not bring up the whole thing again because we all assume you have like a PDF open. So actually a cool way you can run this too is if you take your browser, you can actually minimize half of your internet browser to have it in one side and then actually have the passage on the right-hand side. Because that's the thing, on test day, you don't need to memorize the passage. You really don't, because it's always available. And the way that the MCAT has it set up is that it's kind of the same thing. Half of your screen has the passage itself, the other half of the screen has the question. And so it's kind of nice to kind of get used to like having a half-half model. So if you want to sprint your browser, it'll work. Or you could just leave them slightly off-center so you can click and flip back and forth pretty easily. Perfect. But yeah, that was in the very first paragraph, and we're definitely getting majority of us getting this one correct. Nice work. We got most people saying B. And so we did talk about it, was basically technical stuff. We talked about stocks was a very big one. We talked about trends. We talked about technical things, computational things. When it comes to like hiring a salesperson, we can't really use it to hire a person because you'd have to, there's no data to really interpret from a person. You meet them, you see if they're good at the job or not. You can't really predict. Notice both answer choices A and C have predict in it. And then of course insurance, selecting premiums. That's what do you call that? That whole insurance trade, the math thing. Actuary science, that's it. Also incredibly highly, computational as well. Cool. All right, let's do another one here. I'm going to move this over once again. Click this out. So here's a fun thing we can say. What was that one? There were two words that we actually pulled as a difference between these two. So we wanted to find how they didn't have in common. When we read this, we knew there was going to be a question on this. They both have data, right? But what's the difference? So they both have facts. Frames and rules, Melanie, exactly right. So both of these things did have facts in them, but only the knowledge base had frames and rules, whereas the database was just facts. You got it exactly right. So that means all we're going to do is look through the answer choices, scan for a word that says frames or rules. Do any of the answer choices say frames or rules? Only one of them contains the word either frames or rules. It's answer choice C, which is why we have 93% of you going for answer choice C. That's the fun thing we can do when we go through questions in CARS, is that once you really get used to like identifying, okay, we're looking for the word, then you can just go through the answers, find the one that has it, read it to make sure that it says knowledge bases have rules and not databases have rules, circle it, and be done with it. It can actually break down to pretty quick once we get down to that. It's pretty fun. All right, so I think this is our last one, and we'll move on to a new learning goal. This is a tricky one. All right, looking great. Got most people going for it. So a couple of things we can eliminate here. So we don't have anyone going for A. So infer that computers contain miniature circuits on silicon chips. That had nothing to really do with what we were talking about, other than it also deals with computers. Why? We have some people voting for C, but why don't we like C? I mean, we have a couple folks voting for it, but not as many as the other ones. Yeah, we never said they have to be more successful. We said that they could work, and in certain contexts, of course, they could work. We never said it had to be better than. We just said that they would have to do it. And so what was the one thing that we actually did talk about a lot in this passage about how these expert systems work? We've got databases, we've got knowledge bases, we've got these inference engines that tie them together with rules. Once again, Kelsey and Jennifer and Ariel, which means we're probably going to, of course, have rules in the answer choice once again. Only answer choice B has rules in the answer choice, and so it is, in fact, answer choice B. Nice work. Now, one thing that I would want to warn those people who did choose C, notice in order for D, it's saying that chips would have to increase over the past decade. We never said that we would predict the stock prices to go up. We just said in order to predict the stock prices. And so in the past, if they did talk about stock prices going up and using things like that to predict, the question stem never made you do that, though. And so make sure you're staying within the realm of the question stem itself and not just choosing something that's in the passage but not necessarily addressing the question stem. All right. So this might be my favorite part of this class, and this will probably be the main thing we talk about for the rest of today because this is really where it's at. Wrong answer types. Now, we've already gone through it quite a bit. We're going to keep doing so, but we're really going to focus on it. And so in order to do so, we're going to kind of make a point to not even really go through much reading and mapping. We'll just kind of jump into questions. All right, so now the four main wrong answer pathologies. First is opposite. So opposite is look out for words like nots, excepts. I want to warn you, but the MCAT doesn't hate double negatives. See what I just did there? Aha. Oh, yes. That was very meta, I think, is what you call that. But they love double negatives. They really, really do. It happens all the time. And so what you want to do if you do get a double negative like that, you want to actually rephrase it to the positive. I've heard people say that they've seen triple negatives before, which, you know, like the only time that I think I've seen a triple negative is if it's a double negative where it's talking about like an inhibitor, you know, where it's kind of like it's not necessarily 3 knots, but it's, you know, it's effectively 3 knots, where you want to then rephrase it as a negative, right? So 2 negatives makes it positive, 3 negatives still stays negative. I know, it's kind of crazy. Someone told me they saw a quadruple negative once, and I don't even know if that was a thing. I was like, I don't even know if that's right or not. But we do at least know that 3 lefts makes a right. You know, that is definitely a true statement. 3 lefts does make it right. But 2 wrongs, they do make it right. All right, so we'll look for words like not, except, look out for the double negatives. So I get kind of about it like left, left, left. Oh, yeah, that would be right. So a couple examples right here. The development of commercial aircraft has not shortened the time travel between London and New York. And so now one thing I do want you to be aware of, though, when it says that it has not shortened, what does that mean has happened to the time travel between London and New York? This is one thing you got to be really careful with these questions. Does it necessarily mean that it's lengthened? Well, it could have either lengthened or it could still be the same. These are what you need to be really careful with because it isn't necessarily longer or the same. It's one or the other. It's just not necessary. It's definitely not shortened. Exactly. So be careful with little things like that, and that's one way they'll try to trap you on test day. Same thing here. It says the Bengal tiger has grown steadily over the past 100 years. We'll go through more tiger questions in a little bit. This is just a little introduction to the tiger stuff. So yeah, that's not as easy to tie stuff together like the New York one is. Cool. All right, so next one we've got is distortion. These are my favorites, and honestly, these are the easiest to really get good at identifying on test day as well. So distortions are any time that we twist the meaning. If we include words like always, never, must, should, write down should in your notes because it is one of the strongest words that you'll see. If you have super strong language like that, it's probably going to be wrong unless it is equally extreme in the passage. I want to kind of give you a little theme in general here. When you're looking through wrong answers or answers in CARS, you want to find stuff that has wiggle room. If it says prove or disprove, don't trust it. If it says this will happen, is not as good as this might happen. Like coulds, mights, maybe, lend support to, all that's great, whereas like proves, must, is, will. So avoid things that are overly definite, like perhaps is great, Edmund, exactly. Like things that leave it open to interpretation because it's harder to prove it wrong if it says this could happen. Because yeah, lots of things could happen, so that wouldn't necessarily make it wrong. Or if it says this will happen, well, you can kind of prove it wrong if it says this will happen. Does that make sense? Because it won't necessarily happen, as we said before, kind of like with that example with the plane flights from London to wherever it was. Yeah, so look for things that are a bit open. A bit more wiggle room is the way I like to describe that. So though quicker air travel will never match the comfort of sea travel, once again, never, that's very extreme, we don't trust it. Poaching in India is the sole barrier to restoring Bengal tiger populations. Those are some real extreme examples. Exactly. Yeah, so true. Yoda has very strange language structure, and it would not work very well in CARS. All right, so next we've got, of course, the faulty use of detail. Faulty use of detail, we've seen several already, and so it contains accurate details, things that were in the passage, totally true, just doesn't answer the question stem itself. And so it's basically if it asks about paragraph 2, but the answers are coming from a totally different paragraph altogether. So these are kind of hard to use because, you know, that might be true that it's heavily used in Belgium and the Netherlands, but it probably won't address the question. And of course, piano keys and billiard balls might have been made from ivory, but it doesn't matter if we're talking about tigers. So we'll see a bunch of examples of those. And the last is out of scope. We also saw a couple of these already, where it's generally outside the scope of the passage. It's on topic, just introduces some kind of new considerations that weren't in the passage at all. So here's a couple more, introducing dining or whatever it is, or talking about mascots for Bengal tigers all over the country. So things that are out of scope, we've already seen a couple. We're really going to spend the rest of class, though, pointing out a bunch of examples of these. And so as I said, what we're going to do is use this as a sample outline. So we're not going to read the passage. This is the main last thing we're going to do today is really kind of focus in on these wrong answer types. And so we'll just kind of, instead of reading and mapping another passage, we'll just jump right into this. So save ourselves some time. All right, so here we go. It says, which of the following, if true, would most weaken the author's claim? So let's first and foremost just kind of go into the passage. So it sounds like we're talking about revolutions have similar causes. It's something about an undemocratic and oppressive government. Weak states become vulnerable. We have an example of Russian army becoming weak. Mexican army was underfunded. Then some kind of charismatic leader pops up, like Zapata in Mexico or Lenin in Russia. But then it does say that we get totally different outcomes. So like communists in Russia got even more repressive, as we know. And of course, the Cold War and all that stuff started a couple dozen years later. And Mexico ended up getting a lot more democratic. The goal, of course, is to argue that revolutions, they're similar, but of course they can result in a lot of differences as well. All right, so I'll let you guys throw your answers in for these. And we're mostly going to focus on wrong answer types, and then we will use the passage, of course, map as well. Nice, you guys are rocking this. 100% correct so far. Still really good, over 90%. I don't know if you guys knew about this, but we often have these random black stars just appear when people are doing really well. It's kind of weird. I don't know why. It's a weird glitch in the system, but every time there's more than 90% getting this right, it seems to happen. But so we're looking for something that would weaken the claim in the passage, and you guys are correct. It is answer choice B. Where does this contradict? What does this actually contradict? Because we're looking for something that weakens the author's argument. Paragraph 3, Ariel, exactly true. It said that the Mexican army was underfunded and corrupt. If, of course, they received increasing significant funding prior to 1910, that would actually counter the author's argument pretty well. Now, let me know, though, what's wrong with A, C, and D, though? What do you think? What kind of wrong answers are those? It's hard to tell without the passage itself, but... So, you got it. It would strengthen the claim, as Bobby says. Nice work. Jennifer saying the same thing. Ted L saying the same thing. Exactly true. Notice that A supporting it, saying that there was corrupt, there was fraud. Zapata was, of course, a leader, right? We talked about these charismatic leaders popping up. And of course, D, seized land was turned to the present farmers. That was also, we said, it became more democratic. So nice work. They're all opposites. Good job. Let's do the same thing here. I'll clear up the answers. Once again, throw your answer in, but then also try to remember we're focusing on identifying what types of wrong answers we have here. Looking for something the author would most likely agree with. Looking pretty good so far. We're a little torn on this one. We do have the least votes for B and D, though. So let's talk about B and D, because those do have the least votes. What don't we like about B? B first and foremost. You got it. Would have failed. Very, very, very specific. Cannot succeed without. Also very strong and very specific. And so looking at A and C left over, what's the other one that's also pretty extreme? Shared no similar outcomes. I agree as well. C is the right answer. Notice the language that the author uses on C here. It says that revolutionary scenarios tend to feature repressive regimes. This is the kind of things that we like. It tends to be this way. It might be this way. It could be this way. Anything that's overly specific, strong, we call those distortions. Either extremes or distortions, it means the same thing. Exactly. So that's the fun thing. Get really good at this little stuff like this. You can do a lot of eliminations just from like, okay, well, these are all kind of strong. Pick the one that's the most kind of vague, general, and open to interpretation. Exactly. It's very philosophical. You got it. All right, we got a couple more of these. Then we'll talk about some study strategies and ways you can kind of get more out of your CARS prep before we get out of here. But let's finish all these stuff. These are the coolest part of the class. All right, we're definitely rocking this one. Okay, most of us getting it right. Any predictions on what's wrong with the wrong answers here? Because looks like all of these things could be true. Peasants being united by a common philosophy. Russian monarchy resists reform between 1905 and 1917. Sounds like legit information, but only one of these, of course, deals with what we're trying to actually solve. We do have majority of you going for answer choice A. So what do you call these other ones? Because, I mean, we knew we need charismatic leaderships. We knew, of course, that we had a lot of basically the monarchy didn't want to fall. These would all be distractors because they are faulty uses of detail. Nice work. So this is, I think, probably one of the other most complicated things to keep in mind is just because something is true does not mean it's correct. The answer stem itself is specifically focusing on the Russian army itself, right? So even though that like the revolution had charismatic leadership, it's focusing on the revolution and not the army. Only A specifically basically is focusing on the armed forces themselves. So that's another thing to always fall back on. It's got to be a direct link to the question stem. And even though these other things are probably true, in fact, they are true from the passage if you have the whole thing, it's not addressing the issue of the army itself. So you got to go back to that. All right. You got one more of these. Think about the goal. We're looking for a prediction that the author would make. I know we don't have the full passage, but use what we mapped here. We did map the general theme from these passages, or paragraphs. All right, looking great. So looks like we do have majority of us going for answer choice D because that's what we really focused on at the end. So we knew that we basically had completely different results in both Russia as well as Mexico. Even though we start off similar, they had very different ends. So basically, successful revolution does not guarantee. Notice once again, that's the kind of language you like. It doesn't guarantee anything, leaving it kind of vague, generally leaving it a bit open. What don't we like about the other ones? What do you think is wrong with all these other answer choices? Oh, it says it does not guarantee. That's the thing, Bellany. Yeah, if it said it did guarantee, that would be extreme. But since it's saying it doesn't guarantee, it means it either could or it couldn't. Well, that's why we like that. Yeah. But yeah, that not makes a huge difference there. Because I agree, if it said guarantee, then it'd be super extreme. Gotcha. Yeah, it's the opposite, saying that it doesn't guarantee anything, leaving it very open to interpretation. So you think we talked about social media in the passage, given everything that was discussed in the passage? Probably nothing about social media because it sounds like we're talking like 1917 and 1910. Also, notice we didn't really talk about economies at all, and we also never talked about neighboring states. These are all out of scope. So they're not discussed in the passage, which means, of course, that we don't really care about them for the questions themselves. All right, so one more thing to talk about before we get out of here. What we're going to do is we're not going to go through examples of post-phrasing. What I mostly want you guys to know is how to go through your practice tests and what you want to do afterwards. And so when you go through a test, or like this is true whether you're doing it as a full-length exam or if you're doing it as, just doing your homework from CARS class in general, you want to keep in mind there's actually two different mistakes that you can make. Either you fail to recognize the correct answer, or you get sucked into the incorrect answer. And in fact, you're generally making both of them. Now, what I want you to notice, though, when you go through, figure out whether you actually got sucked into the wrong answer itself, or if you just rejected the correct answer and were choosing something that was left over. And so we have these things. We're not going to go through all the examples again, but we have these things called why message sheets. And so what we're going to do is give you an actual download after this class to let you actually fill them out. And so this is basically what we talked about. When you make your why message sheets, figure out what kind of questions are being asked. Do you recognize the incorrect answers, and then figure out what kind of traps you were falling into as you went through. So I actually give you a little download so you can pull it up. It completely explains everything. We'll have it in the very next screen. But thanks for coming today. Stick around. Right after this, I'm going to be teaching the sensation and perception class. It's pretty fun. We get to talk about science, so that's pretty rad. But yeah, hang out in the next slide with the survey and all that other stuff. We'll give you some downloads for recaps and that why message sheet. And also, I'll hang out, and if you have any questions, let us know. In the meantime, have a good short break. We'll see you in about 4 minutes for psych or perception and whatever else it is. All right, take care. See you soon.